Hey, Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. Welcome back. Today we're talking about the presidential election of 1960, one of the most contentious and closest presidential contests in American history. It pitted the Republican Richard Nixon against Democrat John F. Kennedy. Now, Richard Nixon had first been elected to Congress in 1946 as a World War II veteran. He served in the House, then he served in the U.S. Senate, and had a solid resume as 8 years serving as Dwight Eisenhower's vice president. He was the incumbent vice president in 1960. John F. Kennedy was the boy wonder U.S. Senator from Massachusetts. Also had a solid war record, 43 years old. Now, he was the first Catholic seeking the office since Al Smith in 1928, the unsuccessful Democrat who lost to Herbert Hoover that year. There were questions, of course, about Kennedy's religion, the kind of role it would play in his governing. He made a historic speech in Houston in September, championing the separation of church and state, and said those were pillars of American democracy, and he was beholden to no church, no pope, as he served, if he were able to serve as president. Now, it was a highly contentious campaign, the first in which television really played a prominent role, also the first in which 50 states participated, and Richard Nixon was the first presidential candidate to visit and campaign in all 50 states. Both the candidates agreed to participate in 4 historic televised debates that fall. And if you listened on the radio, you thought Richard Nixon won. If you watched on television, many people thought Kennedy won, more erudite, more polished looking than Nixon. Americans went to the polls in record numbers on November 8th in one of the closest contests in history. Now, in the early evening hours, it looked like Kennedy was going to run away with it. He racked up victories in the East and in the South, both Democratic strongholds. But as the hours went by and the votes came in from the Midwest and the West, Nixon closed the gap. At 3 a.m., he went on television and said, "Let's be patient. We don't know how this is going to play out. It looks good for Kennedy, but let's wait and see." It wasn't until late the next day that Americans learned that John F. Kennedy had been elected president with one of the closest margins in American history. Now, out of over 68 million ballots cast, Kennedy won with just a little over 112,000 votes, 0.2% in the popular vote. Now, of course, the Electoral College is the decider, and there he won handily, 303 to 219. But there were charges of voter irregularity in the Democratic stronghold city of Chicago, where Mayor Richard Daley reigned, and in Texas, which, of course, where Lyndon Johnson was from. And charges of voter irregularities had dogged Lyndon Johnson since his historic 1948 election to the U.S. Senate. Many people called for a recount. Richard Nixon, 3 days after the election, said he would not be a party to a recount. He didn't want to do it. But the issue wouldn't go away. There were a series of articles that appeared in the New York Herald Tribune that were reprinted in papers all over the country with serious charges of voter fraud in Illinois and in Texas. There were calls, including from President Eisenhower, for Nixon to call for recounts. Richard Nixon called the reporter, invited him to his house, and said, "Earl, these are some very powerful, great articles you're writing, but it's time to stop them." He said, "This will create a constitutional crisis that this country cannot afford, and I damn sure will not be a party of one just to simply gain the office of the president." He said that across the country during the Cold War, burgeoning democracies were watching the United States to set the example. And he said, "No man steals the presidency of the United States." Many considered it to be Nixon's finest hour. JFK went on, of course, to serve as president, the youngest man ever elected president at 43. Theodore Roosevelt had been the youngest man to serve as president at 42 upon President McKinley's assassination in 1901, but JFK remains the youngest man elected to the presidency at 43, the first Catholic to do so. And when he took the oath of office in January 1961, the vanquished vice president, Richard Nixon, was sitting on the dais with him. The great wheel of the Constitution turned, and political power passed from one party to another peacefully, and a great constitutional crisis had been averted after the election of 1960. Stay safe, stay strong. I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. As always, thank you for watching.